I would like to introduce Monica Sandberg, who is going to be our presenter today. So Monica, I will hand
Hello,
it off to you.
everyone. Hi, how are you? Before I go to my presentation, I'll just introduce myself. I'm known in the community as Not as Blank Monica. That comes from formulas, which I love, love, love. But even more than formulas, I love automation. So I'm going to share some things that I've learned automation. Specifically, let's see, can you see my screen now? Let's see. Yes?
Yep,
Yeah,
we can
we
see
can
now.
see.
Everybody can see. Okay, so you're not looking at me anymore. Okay. Let me get to so that I can see what I'm doing. And we can begin. Hold on.
While you're doing that, I'll just mention one other thing. So as we're going through things, if you have any kind of questions, if we're right in the middle, we're talking and you don't want to kind of interrupt and ask your question, feel free to put it into the chat. And then, of course, if there's any kind of natural pause in the presentation, we can always ask questions live as well. But I'll be watching the chat if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, this will be one that'll probably get some questions. And in the chat would be great. If you do want me to stop and clarify something, happy to do that as well. So anyway, as I introduce myself, I just want to say this, that I don't have all the answers. And I do have a lot of questions. And I preface every presentation with that, because those questions are what really, really make us good at what we do and make us better at Salesforce in general. And having questions leads to great innovation. And that is where we are here today, because believe it or not, we are going to talk about naming conventions on automation, but we are going to talk about just naming the automation itself. And you're going to say, okay, how can that take more than 2 minutes? Well, I got news for you. There's a lot more to it. And I learned by example here. Over the years, I've been using Flow since it first started. But as you can see, this list of flows, I'm in a developer org here. I have many developer orgs, which I do recommend as a learning tool. And when you just name things any old way, you really aren't able to leverage the automation. Did I hear a question? So let me show you. This is an example of a flow that I got off of the App Exchange, and it's called close lost all open ops on an account. That is how most people name their automation. It's very, very common naming convention. But I have found over the years that it really is not the best way to name your automation. I'm going to show you why. I'm taking this flow and I'm doing a save as a new flow. And I've made a teeny change. You may have spotted it, you may not spot it, but I'm saving that flow. So now I have two flows with a similar name. Now this is one problem with naming, not having a naming convention or using a traditional naming convention. So it sounds all great, close all lost, but now I have close all lost, close lost all. I don't know if you would be able to tell the difference. And a lot of people have flows similar to this, and you think, well, I'll never have that many flows, or I'll never have that many automation that are similar name. Well, yes, you probably will, because you might be using a flow as a screen flow and then something similar as an auto launch flow. So when you're calling a subflow, here's another reason why you need a naming convention. Any active flow you have will show up here on this list, and you want to make sure you grab the right subflow. Now, that can be difficult if you name them any old way, but the other more important thing is best practice would be, and something I've done for many years, is I don't use any flow as a subflow. I specifically create a flow to be used as a subflow. That's super, super, super important. And then I have to be able to spot those subflows that are ready to be used as a subflow when I'm calling them. And the reason is because subflows, you would be inputting variables, you would be outputting variables, you would be doing different things. And you never want to just use any flow. It may not get you the results you want if it's not prepped properly. So Salesforce, oh, we've been asking for this forever. And they've been giving us best practices, but it's changing all the time. So in 2019, I did a Salesforce, a Dreamforce session, and it was called Mastering Process Automation. The best practices in 2019 are not the best practices today. They are changing all the time. So if you Google flow best practices, Salesforce flow best practices, this document will come up. And this is something Salesforce has recently released. Wonderful, fantastic. But it tells you what you should do. It doesn't tell you how to do it. And that is where you have to develop and have your own methodology and framework, or follow someone else's methodology and framework. And that is changing all the time. So over the years, I've been doing automation for so long, I have my own methodology and framework, which I'm going to share with you now. One of the best practices is naming convention. I jumped a little fast there. And the reason is, in naming your automation, just the name of it, not even counting once you get into your automation, that's a whole nother session. It really, really can make a difference, as I just showed a few examples. And that is best practice. So how do we do that? Well, I have been struggling with this for years, but I have come up with some really, really interesting ways and my own methodology and framework for naming automation. And of course, I called it Not as Blank. But look at the font that I chose here. It's called Mystery Quest. And that's the truth. When you are coming up with these frameworks and methodology, or you're following someone else's, it's always changing. So it is a mystery to some degree of the best way to do it. But over time, you will find the best way, which I feel like I'm getting closer. And it's also a quest. And so I suggest everyone either follow someone else's, take someone else's, you could take mine and modify it, or make your own. But you must be consistent in anything you do in Salesforce. There has to be, this is how I do things, and this is how I always do it. Because I have automation from 10 years ago or 8 years ago, and I did things a certain way. And now that I have my new methodology and framework, I now will try to refactor and move towards everything being the same, so that I really know what's happening in my org. So here's 3 principles of my methodology and framework. And the number one thing is that I say to myself, I must adhere to my own naming conventions always. If I am refactoring and I can't change the API name, then I change the label, or I clone and start over and refactor into a new automation. My labels, and this is going to be interesting, I am probably one of the only people that do this, and you're going to see it, is I start, and you'll see, don't worry about it right now, I start every process automation label with either a symbol or a word, draft or depreciated. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to show you that. The second, number 3, is probably my number 1. If you get nothing, absolutely nothing else out of this presentation, think about this and consider doing what I do. Every automation in my org is numbered, a unique number, no matter what. I, in my production org, have a number for my automation, and you will see why that will save your life, and that will take you to new levels on everything you do in automation. A unique automation number. So let's dive a little further. Okay, so here's an example of my naming convention. And I'm starting left to right, and I'm just showing you in yellow what we're going to start with, these symbols and why these matter. So this is my own framework that I've come up with. I use and every time I have a sub-process. So if I have a flow or I have a process that I know I'm going to call from another process or another, I use the and symbol. I use a dollar symbol for templates. And we're going to talk about that a little more, but everyone should be using templates, especially with screen flows. you should have a template that is how you're going to start every single new screen flow that you produce, so there's consistency in your screen flows. It will also save you so much time. Now, this next one, exclamation point. I use this to denote that whatever flow, and we're just talking about flows right here, but I would do similar for Process Builder, is a dollar exclamation means that something is going to happen, a DML action, some type of action. I'm going to create, I'm going to update, I'm going to delete something. So I can tell right away that that flow is not a sub-process and is not a template, and that I am going to be doing something with that flow. Now, there are times, and you wouldn't even think, I don't think a lot of people think about this, but especially with screen flows, you may not be manipulating any data. And a great use case for that would be on a Lightning component on a page. You can show your user, you can do computations for them and have formulas running in the background and say, okay, here's the discounted rate. You can be showing them certain criteria like location information based on some formulas or some lookups and other things that you're doing in the background that user doesn't have to know how to do. And that could be an informational. So I would call that a display. So on that one, you can see that I don't have the exclamation point. And as I'm working and you have this long list of flows, sometimes you're working on something, you're not even close to prime time, you're not close to getting it ready. I put the word draft there. I'm not sure what I'm doing with it. I'm trying something out, and I started off with draft. If it's something I've deactivated and I want to keep for historical purposes, I put depreciated. So this is how it would look when you're looking at how these naming conventions work. And the first criticism I will hear from people is, well, you can't put symbols on the API name. Don't worry about it. I've been doing this for years. It works fine, because almost everywhere in Salesforce that you're going to be looking at your flows, particularly from a subflow, from a Lightning component, in a debug log, Salesforce is going to show you the label, not the API name. So Salesforce puts in an X before that number. It's fine. It's not going to cause any problem. The good thing about that is when you go to refactor, and let's say you can't change your API name because that flow is running, it's active, it's working somewhere, you just don't want to mess with it right now, you can change your label and leave your API name temporarily, or for now, until the next time that you would be completely refactoring that flow. So here's the automation number. This is the most important thing you can do, is to assign a unique number. Now, in my methodology, I've decided that it's going to be 4 digits max. That's my rule. And my suggestion to you is to either use starting zeros, because you don't want to use a 1 and then you'll have a 10. And when you go to sort, it'll put it in a weird order. So you either want to use starting zeros, or I have chosen to start with 100. So all of my flows start with 100. And that gives me, I'll never get to that point. I'll never get to 1,000 flows. God help me. But that is why we're going to start with 4 numbers. And you're going to see that this number is not just for organization. You're going to see some magic that we can do when we number our automation. Now, the next thing I want to know when I name my flows particularly, am I running in system mode or user mode? So an advanced feature now in Salesforce on screen flows, it used to be that screen flows automatically, no matter what, were running in user mode. You can override that now and run in system mode, God mode. In other words, in system mode, it's as if the user is an admin and you don't have to worry whether they have access to that object or to that field or any of those things. And it's like magic, system mode. It's a wonderful thing, but you don't always want it. Sometimes you want to restrict the users to user mode. I want to know by glancing at the name of my flow, whether I'm in system mode or user mode. I don't want to click through, try and remember whether I'm in system mode or user mode and go through. I'd have to go into, the flow builder to find that information. Now, the next thing is, what type of flow is it? And is it an auto launch flow? Is it a screen flow? Is it a platform event triggered flow? Is it a record triggered flow? Is it a schedule triggered flow? Is it a process builder? So I have shorthand. Now, this is what I've come up with. I don't mean that it has to be this way. You can come up with your own system, your own way of denoting what type of process you have. But by glancing at that name, I know instantly what I'm looking at. Next is, if I am running a record trigger flow, is it before save or after save? Again, these are advanced settings here and different things that you would be doing, but you need to know that. And you want to know that right away by glancing at, again, that's something that you would have to be digging through to find out whether you're in before save or an after save situation. Next, where am I running my automation from? So, as an example, sometimes I have in my org, in my production org, a way to create accounts. And I have a global version of this that I can run from the home page. And in that version, I have certain things, but I also have related, I can't tell you my exact thing in my production org, but I have related custom objects that I also want to create accounts for that have something to do with that custom object. Another example would be contact. If I have my users create contact from global, I create the flow that they have to look up an account first. But if I want them to create a contact from an account page, I don't want my users to have to find that account. Salesforce already knows what account that is. So that would be an account version. So that's why I would have that word there, contact global lead form as a custom object. Those are where I'm going to run my flow from. So I can glance right away and know where I'm running that flow from. Now, the next thing is, what am I doing with my flow? Now, in this case, I'm showing you that I'm actually doing an action, account create or contact create. You may have something that's not as specific, that's not an action, that you just want to say billing update or something like that. That would be okay. You establish your own methodology. And you see, I've just made a list for myself of what I'm doing here. But I always want to know, I'm running on global, and what am I doing? I'm account create. Many times in your flows, you're doing many things. You really don't want to get too long with this and have, like, this thing go account create, contact update, and like 10 other things. But you want to hit the main part, or the biggest, most important function. So that's how, and again, now this last part is, am I creating, am I updating, am I upserting, am I deleting, or am I doing a lookup, which I showed you that I'm not actually changing any records, but I am doing a lookup. Another one might be account display on a, let's say I'm on another object and I'm on an opportunity, and I create a flow, a screen flow that shows me a lot of information from account, and I want to show that to my users. I would have account, and I would use the word display. That's just my personal way of naming. So you make yourself a naming key. And this is just to show you how I do it and to give you some inspiration. But what you would do, the next step, was you would make yourself a naming key so you're very consistent. So what does this do for me now that we're using this name? Right now I'm in a lightning component, and I'm going to show you here that I want to call, I'm on an account record page, and I want to grab one of my flows to use on the account record page. notice the Salesforce is showing me that label. I told you it would. So there it is with the exclamation point and everything. So I want to find something that is built that says account, because I know it's built to run on an account page. That's my system. So that I don't grab one of my flows that's not ready to run on the account page. So I can tell right away that's a screen flow in system mode, account, and I'm going to create context. So I've chosen a flow, and I can tell right by the name of it that I know that that flow I can run on this page, no problem. And that's one of the advantages of this naming convention, or something similar to this. I'm not saying this is the way to do it. I'm just showing you this is how I do it. Because otherwise, if it's just create case, you have no idea. You have no idea really what mode am I in, what is anything about that flow, really. And that's one of the things that many people do. Okay, so now I want to show you permission sets. This is where the magic can really happen with the numbering. Okay, so one of the best ways to restrict or to keep track of who can run what flow, and especially your screen flows, right, is to use permission sets. Instead of it just being anyone can use that screen flow, and there's many times you don't want. So what I do is I create a permission set, and I name it the same way I name my flow. And let me show you this one. Do you see? I've named my permission set 124 USF account update client details perm set. Really, really, really clear. And the flow that I'm providing access to is 124 USF account update client details. So I'm matching the number 124 124 to my permission set. So why does that matter? Well, a lot of times you're allowing your users access to multiple flows. And this permission set assignment, I can tell right away what flows my users have permission to. It says 102 SSF global account create perm set. That's my permission set. It looks almost exactly like my naming for my flow, so I know which flow each user has access to. And those numbers make it really easy to make sure you have the right one. Without the numbers, you can get confused really quickly and mistake one flow for another. So another example of why this naming, or any naming convention that's really good, matters. This is a debug log. And when you have problems, you're going to need to run a debug log. And that's a whole nother session on running debug logs. But in this debug log, right there is my flow with the exclamation point 107 USF account update billing. So I know right away everything I need to know about that flow in my debug log. Now, in a transaction, you could have multiple flows running. You could have subflows running. And if you can see the names of them really, really easy and understand what's happening in your debug logs, that will really, really be a lifesaver. And so what you're doing is you're building for the future. You're thinking future. You might only have 2 flows now, but you don't know what the future holds and what you're going to have. So having a really good naming convention, and I've kind of learned this the hard way over the years, and I have so much automation in my system. So let me show you. I don't know if I jumped. I did jump. Hold on. Let me just see where I'm at. Okay, so there's debug. Some more magic is custom metadata. Now these are advanced. This is more to show you how to leverage this naming. So we don't want to go into too much detail. That's probably another session, but let me just show you a little bit about. If you have this automation number, you can create custom metadata and match it up perfectly. 101 is 101. 102 is 102. And that flow, this 102, matches to flow 102 And I can do a lot of things. I can do a validation bypass. I can turn my flows on and off without activating and deactivating them. I can see my API names. I can do whatever I want to do here. I could pass in, perhaps you have an ID or some other hard-coded information that you want to do that you shouldn't be having in your automation itself. You can do it this way by matching that number to the number of your automation. I'm going to show you a little bit further. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I have automation hour sessions and things that explain this a little further. But this is something I do on every single flow that I create that's a screen flow, especially, is I create a flow switch in custom metadata. And my flow switch turns my flows on and off and has a way of me keeping track of them. And by doing that, all I have to do is match that automation number. If you were trying to use custom metadata with your flows, let's say, it's very, very hard to do a lookup and match up to the right flow or the right process or anything else, and to really have anything really work easily. And this I found is the best way. So you get an advantage with this numbering system. You really, really do. And so I just have a few fields here, and I want to show you this automation number. So we're in custom metadata, and I made my rule that 4 digits, right? When you're doing custom metadata, do not make that field a number field. You make it a text field and you set it as unique. And I'm going to tell you why you do that. That way you can be assured when you're matching up, you never have a duplicate, because you can't have a duplicate and then you won't be able to match it up. So even though it's a number, it's a text field unique in your custom metadata side. And that way you make sure. So you don't want ever to have 2 flows with the same number. But by making this unique, you will find out that you made a mistake and did a duplicate, because as you try to do a custom metadata record, it'll say, you already have a 102. And you'll go, whoops, and you'll go back and renumber your automation. So here is a template. Now, we talked about why I use the $ to template. This is my screen template. And if I'm going to create a screen flow, I'm using something, this is in my developer org, so this is a little bit odd, but I'm using something very much like this to create any screen flow. And I'm never, ever going to activate a template. I'm going to do save as, new flow. So I've created all of this, all of these things here that, like, my users just love GIFs. So I have my GIFs all ready to go. I can use these screens in any flow that I do, and I don't have to recreate this every time. So I have my fault email recipients already ready for me, and I have actions ready for me in this template. Now, it doesn't mean when I save as that I'm going to use all of this. I might be deleting it in the next flow, but I have it available to me. Here's where the automation number goes in. So you have an assignment and you have var automation number, and you put in your number that corresponds to the flow, right? So I have a flow 151 in my org, and I'm just going to pass that number in once I get to my new flow, not in the template, right? And so when I do my new flow, I'm going to label it 151. So that way, this flow is passing in 151. And then I'll have a metadata that's also for 151. And I'm going to grab that automation number and get records from the metadata. So I don't want to get it too much into this, but this is just kind of showing you how it works. We can go into more detail some other time, or if you're really, really interested, I could stop and go into this in more detail now. But this is just to show you why that number you can do so much by numbering and starting out with something like this as your template. And there is a great reason, to be able to look at all your flows in one place. If I want to turn off my flows for some reason, even you can do this in an after save flow or something, I can turn them off and then run bulk updates and then turn them back on. So really, really simple. So that is I don't know how long I spoke for, but that's a lot more than 2 minutes just about naming a flow.
If you don't mind jumping in. Before I actually go through my questions, anybody else have any questions or anything you want to throw out there? I have like 2 pages worth of questions. So.
Oh, geez.
Hey, Monica.
Yes.
Hey, thanks again for sharing your time with us today. Can you throw a link up in the chat for your automation hours, or just just to the general automation hours website?
Sure, I can do that once we get off the call. If you just look up my name and automation hour, there was one just 2 months ago. I think I did one. I've been on there 4 times. It's the very first one was when I think I first came up with this. I built my own automation command center, which at the time also dealt with whether a user had access to the flow, but Salesforce built that functionality now. Yay. That's why we're using permission sets, but I will be happy to add that.
Yeah, and Jason, I'll make sure that link is included in the meeting notes to go out too. So when we post it to LinkedIn or the VetForce community, the links for the automation hour and even the one specifically for Monica, I'll make sure included.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Monica? Okay, I'm gonna throw one out. All right. So you mentioned that when you're working on a flow, you put draft as a prefix there. Simple question, do you put that for just a label, or do you also put that draft tag for the API name as well?
I usually just do the label, just so that I can glance down and know where I'm at. I missed that.
I don't think that was a question for you. Yeah, okay. I think that was not on mute. Okay, now I notice you also have the symbols in the beginning of your flows, which I think is great. But what if you had a screen flow that also did DML? Would you put both symbols there?
So the screen flow will have a symbol. What did you mean by that? Did you mean if it's a subflow?
So if you have a screen flow that at some point you have a thing in there that's update account, like as an element within your screen flow.
So those were screen flows that I was showing. I think you're asking, did you mean if it's a subflow, would I put 2 symbols?
Yeah. Yeah. So
I could. I don't always do that. I think to me on those, the screen flows are almost always going to have a DML involved in them. You would, well, not necessarily. No, you're right. You're right. I hadn't thought about putting the 2 symbols there, to be honest. So that's how things progress.
Something to consider, right? One just comment that I had. So just watching you go through this and how it makes sense where you're labeling your flows in one way and then it makes it easier to reference them from somewhere else. I started thinking that got me thinking I should probably do the same thing on reports, because I can see how keeping all my reports organized.
I actually do use this. I use the same kind of thing. I use Conga, and I will number my templates and then be able to find the template from the button to the template. There's a numbering system. So Conga assigns you a template number. And so I take that template number and then that is in my button label so that I can match it up. So I use a numbering system in other places as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And then my final question, the switching mechanism that you had for your screen-based flows, do you also have templates like that for record-triggered flows that follow that same kind of model of being able to turn them on and off as needed?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't work as well. You can't really do it with a before save, because the before save is only on the object, obviously, that you're, it just doesn't, I don't want to add the DML there. It just depends, because you are going to add a little bit extra to those flows, and so if you're going to be running on bulk or something like that, but I do have it on some of my record trigger flows.
Cool, nice. Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Yeah, I mean, I have just one comment on top of that. I'll never use the symbol. Everything is fine, apart from for the naming convention. But for Salesforce field and label, I personally not use any symbol. That's otherwise numbering and others are absolutely fine with that.
Yeah, I know you wouldn't do that in code, so that's why I prefaced that it's just easier than writing out or having, you could put the word sub. Again, anybody's preference. Or,
yeah, I mean,
or
it may confuse. I mean, the reason behind it, it may confuse the new admin. Practically, they'll think that the Salesforce allows symbol. I mean, in the field name or the label name. I mean, label name you can put anything. I mean, doesn't matter at all, for that matter. So otherwise your naming convention, really love it. I mean, it's a great naming convention, but without the symbol. And that would be great. Yeah.
I appreciate that, and that's why I said it's mine. It's how I do it, and that everybody has to come up with what they're comfortable with, and how they how best to do it. I totally completely understand that.
And Monica, as you mentioned, your convention might evolve over time. And if you're like me, it evolves every time you create a flow. So you just have every flow has its own standard.
It has evolved over time, because we didn't have platform event record trigger flows. We didn't have record trigger flows. We didn't have before save and after save. All of these things have added over time. So I've had to change the naming convention over time.
Yeah.
I'm in the process of, I mean, really thinking that how I, as a programmer, I mean, kill basically the flow system altogether. I mean, I saw the page of Salesforce and that complicated flow. I mean, I think it's a nightmare for any architect or any great programmer to develop that kind of flow altogether. It's such a waste of time. I mean, altogether, I don't know why Salesforce is pushing so much on flow. So that's a really, I mean, pain point for me. I mean, I'll never adopt a flow for anyway. I'll do everything to the programming as per as possible.
Right. So for people that code, obviously that would be the first choice, but there are a lot of orgs and a lot of people that don't, and Salesforce is providing us with a similar functionality.
No, see, that's a huge controversy. I mean, yesterday, I mean, the last meeting, I think, what the name, I mean, the great guy who explained how he used flow in the ERP project. I supposed to, listen to that webinar, Bill, and I think that, it's a pure marketing. I mean, there's a lot many things. I mean, making more complicated of life of the people.
So let me. I'll play devil's advocate. Not that I'm calling Salesforce the devil, because I am a partner, trusted partner at Salesforce. So what I will say is that I was kind of the same way. So from a development background, I always wanted to just go straight to writing code, because I thought it was more flexible. I had more, tools available to me if I wrote code, that kind of thing. But what I found was when we were doing customization and services for customers, you might be building out functionality that person's going to have to maintain. And they are not like the Salesforce admin. They're not even a developer, not anything. They're a marketing person that happens to also have to manage Salesforce. So, even if the logic or that flow turns out to be pretty complex, generally speaking, they're going to be able to follow along, follow the paths, double click on each thing and figure out what's in there and make adjustments if they need to. So that's one reason why, I've been kind of leaning towards flows for any kind of like basic automation for customers, just because I know it's going to be easier for them to maintain. Not only that, but I know, we have a few like DevOps folks on the call, so I don't know if this is like a good thing to say, but I mean, who wants to like write code in a sandbox and then have to deploy with a chain set or anything? I mean, I could just build the flow directly in production and move on with my day. So there's that too. I know that's probably not the good thing, but
something in production directly.
I just had a
Oh, Bill, you got
Blasted-
yourself in
blasted
there.
right in production.
just had a small heart attack. However, what I will say, I get that some people do that, but so I come from a CI/CD vendor. And I do believe in having development environments, whether sandboxes or scratch orgs, simply because production, you run the risk. This is 18 years of Salesforce implementation talking here. You definitely run the risk of people saying, what's the big deal? It's just a pick list value. And then you've broken an integration. So I would strongly encourage folks to use separate development environments. What I love about Monica's presentation here, and I'm jumping up and down with glee, is that for those of you that use change sets or CI/CD tools like my tool or any of our competitor tools, the naming conventions that Monica is talking about will make it very easy to ensure that you select all related components when you deploy across your sandboxes and ultimately to production, so that no components are left behind. I'm very, very excited about this, Monica.
Just one thing to add to that too, I can even see, as far as the Git commit names and things like that, or branch names, using that same kind of numbering convention is something we do for like our features and defects. I think that's great.
100%.
So, Bill, a question for you. Do you use custom metadata with your code and configuration for the end users?
Believe it or not, no. I don't think I've come up with the use case. I know this is kind of embarrassing. This is like a embarrassing build deploying production without custom metadata, Dave. But yeah, no, I never have. When we first built our application, I don't think custom metadata was even a thing yet. So everything was custom settings, and that works for us. And until we have a very good reason to migrate things, we're going to leave it as is, because it's just been working and it's kind of baked in across the entire application. But yeah, we haven't used custom metadata types, but I'm open to doing so in the future. But you can also
match up to custom settings, and you can use custom settings the same way. And
same theory.
I just choose the metadata. As far as flow versus coding, I will say this. I understand there's a bit of the controversy, but another reason why flow is so wonderful. In my org, we had some developers come in and do some code, and then it never really worked well. But aside from that, the problem we had was then we had business changes, and we needed to make changes to that code, and it's a big deal. Whereas if there is something that happens or changes, you can do it pretty quickly and easily in Flow. And I will say that when you get into screen flows, especially, that with code and then Lightning components and all that, that's a huge, huge undertaking that is so simple in Flow to give your users a better user interface. So screen flows especially, I can understand the thing about the record triggered flows to some degree due to dealing with
they are the
high
worst
quantities.
thing, worst nightmare. I mean, worst nightmare. I mean, I agree with the screen flow,
Yes.
but I mean, if I have to have an option, I'll definitely write a trigger framework. I mean, I would prefer Dan Appleman and his framework of trigger.
Oh, brilliant!
And where
yes.
where I can even do the control of the trigger framework. I mean, I can, because in any trigger you don't have any control over top of that. Who is firing when? So I'll follow full Dan Appleman or Andrew Fawcett. I mean, Bill,
So,
you have something to show, something to say.
Point of order. I will say that I would have agreed with you a couple years ago about that, with a trigger framework being able to control what triggers are firing when and in what order. But I just saw this. Somebody gave a presentation a couple weeks ago about the framework that they have, and I think it's based on custom metadata types where your trigger logic, your flows, your processes, everything can be added to that same framework, and you can manage when they flow and in what order. So,
and then if you number your flows, I'm sure it's a lot easier to keep track of them.
So we're gonna keep hitting on this, and you're gonna be the flow advocate by the end of 2022. That's my goal, Pele, right? So keep working on
which framework is this that you're referring to? Which trigger framework?
Yeah, it's a. I mean, Dan Appelman has given a lot of example. He has a full chapter on the trigger flow and how to do the static variable, everything on the helper class, writing it with the future method. I mean, checking the limit class and everything. He has a code on top of that, and if we follow that, I think. Even I still agree with Bill, and Bill wants me to become the flow advocate, but still from the performance standpoint, Jeff, it's a really nightmare. I agree with you. The flow is great for the screen flow purpose, but for the trigger flow, it's going. Trigger record flow. You think about an admin who is a new, having that complicated screen. It will be much more easier to teach him the Apex code rather than writing, that kind of flow.
Let me jump in here. I totally disagree with everything you're saying. Everything I'm telling you right now. As a Salesforce employee, an engineering team, and as a person who's been writing Apex since it came out in 2009, flows are where it's at. The flow team at Salesforce is expanding exponentially, and we are making a huge commitment to flows. I actually applied to be on the team a couple months ago. They're expanding rapidly. They're working on tooling, more tooling for flows. Flows are going to be the future. I'm just telling you right now. I would rather, for simple triggers, even record flow triggers, I would rather write flows than write Apex. Talking about this, we've been writing Apex for about 13 years now. I would rather write flows than write Apex for most of the cases.
Some of the challenges are just with batch size, though. Still, it's still a little. You have to do workarounds and things. When they get to that, when it can handle large quantities of data, then I'll be 100% in. I'm dabbling now. That's the only constraint that I can see is
I have a great example. I have a great example over here. I was teaching, guys, and I have because I'm the ISB partner, not like Bill. I have my app listed over the app exchange, but I'm trying to do that, gradually. But what I found that I created the partner developer org, and I created a record because, partner developer org is having 250 MB of data size. I created more than 10,000 rows of, using the Apex, just creating the account name. And the biggest challenge, even with the Apex, I faced it. I don't know. I never asked Salesforce about it. I know the workaround is to create a batch for that. So 10,000 DML rows heat. Salesforce talks about that, the Sockle for loop, it can manage, for loop within a for loop. If you think about that, the for loop with the Sockle statement, then with the batch size, because trigger can handle 200 records as a batch, but it failed ultimately. And even update with the record, it could not even handle the more than 10,000 records. So I have to write a batch class. I have to check a limit on that. Limit class, whether I hit the 10,000 rows or not. Then I have to, write a future in the sense queuable method to, kick off the batch process from there. So that's a problem. I don't know how do you handle that kind of scenario with the flow. If the name, say for example, if a name, say for example, the naming convention we are having, right? If we are having the naming convention like that is the record, if we start with 124, and with version 1, V2, V3, V3, V5, you told about you are not expecting 1,000 such flows, but think about the record perspective. If you have such records, more than 10,000, then there's a hit for the flow, from the Apex perspective, and as well as from the flow perspective, both. So I don't know how to handle the, okay, how do you handle the limit? Basically, in code, I have the opportunity to check the limit class and immediately switch back to saving the record based on, I can create a on the fly a custom object, or I have a custom object. I can save it for the 24 limits if the transaction, because because
You're correct that with when there's issues where you need to bulkify, code
bulkify
definitely
is having a problem over here.
Code is definitely the better way to go for bulkification. But
no, I'm not saying the bulkification of the code itself is a problem, Jenilson. I'm having the problem with the bulkification with the code itself with the Sockle for loop.
Yeah, they have that. But they even have asynchronous processing and flows now too.
Yeah. So I can have in that particular scenario, what I can do, I can check the limit class, right? If I hit it after the Sockle query, I can check how many rows it got returned. And then the moment I see that more than 10,000, then what I'll do, I'll write instantiate a batch class, queuable Apex, and put all that S object into that, and then I can run it on the background and do that. So how do I achieve that in the flow? Is that even possible?
I think at the stage now, it's probably not going to be 100% parity between flows and code as far as queuables, batch Apex, all that kind of stuff. That being said, for the overwhelming majority of basic use cases where you need to update a field when somebody makes a change to, like a different field, those use cases, I think building a very simple flow, a before triggered flow to do those things versus writing code and test classes and everything else, that's probably going to be the best way. But I don't think it's going to be 100%, at least not today, but probably in the future. I'm assuming that there's going to be equivalents of queuables and batch Apex and things built into into the flow. And I'm just going to say that Jeff said that, and he didn't hold up a safe harbor statement. So I'm just going to assume this is all happening like next release. So
forward-looking statement.
So just a quick comment. Code from aspiring developers like myself is really ugly, and we do some really, really bad things in code. So while Apex is accessible, if you jump right to code with inexperienced people, you're going to wind up with some really interesting code.
Yeah, it's more accessible. I'd say flows more accessible.
Also look, there's the number of Salesforce developers is not as large as we want to be at Salesforce. We're trying to figure out how we empower people to take on more of the responsibility of having more complex logic. And most of our developers either come from Java shops, .NET shops, or they're admins who migrate their way in development. And this no-click or this low-code clicks development method is a way to get people who don't have a development background into doing development type processes, and that's huge for us.
Yeah,
Jeff, you are the most advocate of the Apex, but your blog is superb. So you are now advocating for the flow at this moment. I'm just wondering on top of that.
No,
I learned from your blog itself. Reading your blog. I love your blogs. I don't know how. How this flow team. How are you advocating for the flow? As an Apex developer.
It's a work in progress still. Usually it takes about 3 releases for us to get something right. We release something. First time it's usable. Second time it's really good, and the third time it's fully baked. I think flow is going to evolve more and more over time. It really is.
Well,
Jeff, that's the question.
Hold on 1 second. Can I jump in? Just
very good, Janelle.
Yeah. Real quick. Here's the thing that I've seen over the years as an SI is that people were so heavily using Apex, right? And so to Monica's point, I would see things like a trigger that every time a customer had logged 10 or more cases in a month, then the trigger would update the account record to show that account record as a high risk, right? That's way too heavy a lift for such a simple automation. That is a much better use case for a flow or a process builder or a workflow role, because it's much lighter. And as Monica was saying, it can change with the business requirements. So if the business comes along and says, oh, no, we want it to be a high visibility customer, if they have 10 or more cases logged in a month, or if they renew at $10,000 or more, that's an easier fix than having to go get a developer. Where the developers come into play and are still needed is for the bigger lift, the bigger, heavier development items that take a lot longer time and higher level of effort.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Now, I think we're going to have to pause this right now. So 3 quick things I want to throw out there. First of all, Monica, I want to thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to go rename all of my flows and drive the rest of my team crazy at the end of the day. I want to remind everybody that we're not meeting next week because it's going to be the day after Thanksgiving, and I'm going to try to take a day off. And I also want to remind everybody, based on this conversation, it seems like we're broken up into 2 groups of the clicks and the codes. So the new West Side Story movie is on HBO Max, so I'm going to watch that this weekend too. So, but if anybody has any other questions, let me know. I'll post a recording up on community and in the notes as well.